On the day my world turned upside down, I never imagined I would be standing outside my own home, with nothing but a suitcase and a pounding heart. My name is Olivia Harper, I'm 33, and for the past 8 years, I had been living with my husband and his family in what I thought was a harmonious household. I worked remotely as a freelance interior designer, enjoying a flexible schedule, and though our life wasn't extravagant, it was comfortable. My husband, Daniel, seemed loving, and I believed his mother, Margaret, though strict, respected me. At least on the surface. Everything seemed fine until that morning. I had just returned from a client meeting, excited about a new project that could finally secure a small savings account for myself, a little nest egg, independent from the household finances. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, Margaret was there, her eyes cold, her lips pressed into a thin line. The way she looked at me, I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down. "Olivia, we need to talk," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "It's time for you to leave this house." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Leave? What could she possibly mean? My thoughts raced. I had always followed her rules, kept the house tidy, contributed financially when possible, and never interfered in family matters. How could this be happening now? Margaret's reasoning was twisted, as always. "Daniel and I agree that this home should be for our family. You are not part of it anymore," she continued. There it was, plain and cold. A decree, a verdict, a cruel sentence I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Daniel, my husband, who usually stood by me, said nothing. His eyes avoided mine, darting between his mother and the floor as if he had no control over the situation. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that the people I trusted most were willing to turn me away without a second thought. For a moment, despair took over. I pictured myself on the street, luggage in hand, with no family, no support, no place to call home. The life I had known, built with love and patience, felt like it was crumbling. But then a spark ignited, a thought that refused to be extinguished: I am not as powerless as they think. Before the storm, there had been peace. Margaret had always been controlling, but subtle. She criticized my cooking, my furniture choices, my spending habits, but always with a smile that fooled everyone else. Daniel seemed caught in the middle, balancing between obedience to his mother and his affection for me. I had tolerated it because I believed love required patience and compromise. Yet, now, her hand had moved the chess pieces decisively. She wanted me out, thinking she had won. She thought that by removing me from the house, she could secure everything for her son, her vision of family order. But she had underestimated one crucial detail: I had quietly been managing a financial legacy that no one in that household had ever suspected existed. A property deed, long hidden in my family archives, a house that legally belonged to me, unclaimed and overlooked by everyone, until now. I had discovered it months ago, a legal loophole that could shift the power entirely. But at the time, I kept it a secret, waiting for the right moment. And as Margaret waved her metaphorical gavel, forcing me into what she thought was defeat, I realized that moment had arrived. I left the house that day with tears streaming down my face, clutching my suitcase, feeling the sharp sting of betrayal. The neighborhood I had known as my home suddenly seemed alien. Each step away from the front door was a mix of fear, heartbreak, and a burning determination that I would not let anyone, not even Margaret, dictate my destiny. Walking down the quiet street, memories of the years I had spent nurturing relationships, cleaning up after others, and holding back my ambitions flooded my mind. I thought of all the subtle manipulations, the passive-aggressive remarks, the tiny humiliations that had accumulated over time. Each one had been a test, a way to see how much I could endure. And now, finally, I understood, it was not a test of endurance, they were trying to break me. But Olivia Harper was not easily broken. My mind raced with plans. I would find a way not just to reclaim my dignity, but to turn the situation completely on its head. They thought I was powerless, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the very house they tried to kick me out of would one day have my name on the deed, that the tables would turn, and I would hold the ultimate authority over every corner of the home they had thought belonged solely to them. That night, sitting alone in a small rented apartment, I made a promise to myself. No more hiding. No more bending to the whims of those who underestimated me. I would bide my time, gather my evidence, secure my claim, and when the moment came, I would step back into that house not as the daughter-in-law they dismissed, but as its rightful owner. Little did Margaret know, the eviction she considered a victory was the opening act of a story in which I would emerge not just as a survivor, but as the master of my own destiny. Every insult, every sneer, every cold glance she had thrown my way was fuel. And I would use it all to ensure that when the final curtain fell, justice, and sweet, undeniable triumph, would be mine. The day after I was forced to leave, I returned to the house with a wary heart. Margaret wasted no time reminding me of my place in the family. Every word she spoke was laced with subtle contempt, like hidden daggers wrapped in silk. "Olivia, I think you should start preparing to move out soon. Daniel will need space with his real family," she said, her voice smooth yet icy. On the surface, it seemed polite, but I knew it was the first warning shot in a long game. I kept my calm, replying quietly, "I'll handle it, Margaret." But inside, a storm of unease was brewing. She wasn't just threatening me, she was testing my limits, seeing how far she could push me. Over the following days, her actions grew increasingly clear. She scheduled family events that excluded me, made major household decisions without consulting me, and subtly criticized my management of the home. Everything was designed to make me feel unwelcome, to remind me that I didn't belong. Daniel, my husband, remained torn. He loved me, but his loyalty to his mother often overshadowed his support. Conversations with him grew tense. I wanted to trust him, yet I had to stay alert. One evening, I overheard him whispering to his mother, "Mom, don't scare Olivia. She's my wife." But Margaret merely smiled, eyes glinting with mockery. Sometimes, people need to know their place. The warning signs kept piling up: delayed mail, strange mishaps with household tasks, cancelled appointments with clients. I realized this was no longer just a personal conflict, it was a silent, strategic effort to push me out of a life I had considered stable and secure. I started documenting everything: her subtle insults, her obstructive actions, and even minor financial manipulations. I was no longer a passive victim. I began to understand the game, observe, analyze, and wait for the right moment. One morning, while sorting through bills, I discovered a receipt for a major purchase signed by Margaret under my name without my knowledge. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just control, it was a tactic to undermine me in front of Daniel and the rest of the family. Everything I did, from small chores to big responsibilities, was being scrutinized and manipulated to diminish my value. Anger slowly turned into resolve. I wasn't just being pushed out, I was being manipulated into feeling guilty for existing. But I remembered the family estate I legally owned, a property that had remained hidden from the family in-law. It was empty, legitimate, and fully under my name. In that instant, a slow-burning plan began to take shape, not just to reclaim what was mine, but to execute a perfect revenge that Margaret would never anticipate. I didn't act hastily. Every step was calculated. I continued to live my daily life, all the while watching, analyzing, and waiting. When Margaret tried to entrap me with small household disputes, I documented everything. When she berated or pressured me, I quietly observed Daniel's reactions. Every detail was a puzzle piece for my larger strategy. I began studying legal documents, ownership papers, and contracts that could prove my rights over the house. Every night, after Daniel went to sleep, I meticulously reviewed documents and gathered evidence. My anger and sense of betrayal had transformed into a quiet, simmering power. Interactions with friends and clients became even more crucial. I needed to demonstrate, both to myself and the world, that I remained strong despite the mounting pressure. Every move I made was no longer just survival, it was strategy. Then, one day, a small opportunity appeared. Margaret, overconfident as always, left a legal document partially exposed, a proof of my ownership that she assumed irrelevant. I noticed it immediately. It was the perfect starting point for my first move in the long-awaited revenge. I didn't need to rush, the first strike would be subtle, but its ripple effects would change everything. I realized this battle wasn't merely about the house. It was about dignity, respect, and power. From that moment on, I decided, no one, Margaret, Daniel, or anyone else, would control me again. I would reclaim everything, and they would have no choice but to witness the full extent of my strength. Weeks passed, and the tension in the house thickened like a storm cloud ready to burst. Margaret's subtle manipulations escalated into outright confrontations. I could feel every day that I was being pushed closer to a breaking point. But what she didn't realize was that her arrogance was giving me exactly what I needed, openings to turn the tables. It all came to a head one evening. I returned from a client meeting to find the living room in disarray. Important documents were scattered across the floor, my laptop was missing, and Margaret sat in Daniel's favorite chair, smiling with a smug satisfaction that made my blood boil. "Looking for this?" she asked, holding my laptop high above her head. Her tone was playful, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "You really should be more careful, Olivia. It's dangerous to think you have control here." I froze for a moment, the shock of her audacity hitting me like a physical blow. This was no longer subtle manipulation, this was blatant sabotage. Every important project, every bit of evidence I'd been compiling, could have been destroyed. My heart raced, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I suggest you put that down, Margaret," I said, my voice steady but low. "It doesn't belong to you." She laughed lightly. "Oh, but it does now, in the sense that you can't seem to protect anything in this house. Maybe it's time you accept your role, Olivia, outsider." The words stung, but they also ignited a fire within me. My hands shook, not from fear, but from suppressed rage. Years of respect, of trying to maintain harmony, of silently enduring her subtle cruelty, had led to this moment. And yet, I realized something crucial: I was not powerless. I retrieved my backup drive, safely hidden in my bag, and slid it onto the table. "You might think you've won, but every detail, every transaction, every move you've made has been documented." I could see her amusement waver, a subtle flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Margaret scoffed, "Oh, please. What could you possibly do? You're leaving soon anyway." That was the spark. I had the evidence of her manipulations, the proof of her attempts to control and belittle me, and most importantly, I had my secret card, the house itself. Margaret had believed, with complete confidence, that she held all the power. She didn't know that I was the true owner of the estate she had humiliated me over. That night, I sat down with Daniel and laid everything out before him. At first, he was shocked, unsure of how to process the cascade of revelations. You own the house?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. "Yes," I said calmly. "Legally, it has been mine for years. Everything Margaret has done to push me out was meaningless against this simple fact." Daniel's face shifted from shock to guilt, then to understanding. He realized that his mother's attempts at control had blinded him to the truth, and that for too long, he had been complicit in marginalizing me. But it was too late for regrets. Now, the stage was set for me to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The next day, I contacted the legal firm handling the property. Within hours, I had all documentation verified, notarized, and ready for official action. Margaret, as always, underestimated my patience and intelligence. By the time she realized what was happening, The house legally belonged to me. The first wave of confrontation occurred at breakfast. Margaret entered the kitchen, her usual commanding presence brimming with arrogance. I calmly handed her a copy of the property transfer documents. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she was speechless. This can't be," she stammered, her voice faltering. "I've lived here for decades." "I'm aware," I replied softly. "And now, you must accept that the house belongs to me. Your attempts to remove me, to control me, were futile." Her shock quickly turned into anger. "You'll regret this, Olivia. You're nothing without this family," she spat, but her confidence no longer carried weight. I remained composed, watching as the woman who had once dictated my every move struggled to reconcile with reality. From that moment, the dynamics of the household shifted dramatically. Daniel finally recognized the depth of his mother's manipulation and stepped aside, supporting me fully. Margaret, though still present, could no longer assert dominance. Every subtle snide comment, every attempt at undermining me, now fell flat. Over the next few days, I consolidated my control. I restructured the household management, reassigned responsibilities, and subtly exposed Margaret's past manipulations to the rest of the family. Her social power began to crumble under the weight of evidence and my calm, authoritative response. Yet, I didn't act out of spite. My goal was never revenge for its own sake, it was justice. Margaret had tried to belittle me, to erase my presence, but I chose to reclaim control with strategy, patience, and undeniable proof of my ownership. By the end of the week, the household's balance had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the outsider, no longer the victim. I had quietly, deliberately, and efficiently assumed my rightful place. Margaret, who had orchestrated my exile, now faced the reality that power could not be taken through intimidation alone. For the first time, I truly felt free within the home that had once felt like a cage. Every room, every corner, every familiar space now belonged to me legally and morally. And Margaret, despite her lingering presence, could no longer make me doubt my value or my authority. After securing legal ownership of the house, I knew that reclaiming power wasn't enough. I needed to confront Margaret directly. Her reign of intimidation had lasted far too long, and though she had underestimated me, I was determined to ensure she could never exert control again. But this confrontation had to be deliberate, precise, and public. I spent the next few days preparing meticulously. Every misstep Margaret had made, every underhanded attempt to humiliate me, had been documented. Emails, recordings, receipts, even witness statements from long-suffering household staff, all pieces of a puzzle that would demonstrate her manipulations clearly and indisputably. I wasn't acting impulsively, I was building a case so strong that even her denials would crumble. The evening I chose for the confrontation, I invited Margaret and Daniel to dinner. I set the table carefully, ensuring the mood was calm yet tense. When Margaret arrived, her usual confident smile masked nothing, her eyes flickered nervously as she scanned the dining room. She sensed, instinctively, that something was different. "Olivia, what is all this?" she asked, her voice sharp, though a hint of unease crept in. "Dinner, Mother," I replied smoothly, pouring wine into glasses. "And a conversation about truth, transparency, and accountability." As we ate, I began narrating the events that had transpired since she had first tried to push me out. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't attack her personally. I simply presented facts. Each incident, from trivial inconveniences to serious sabotage, was laid out calmly. The documents I had compiled were displayed discreetly on the table, within her sight but not threateningly so. She scoffed, trying to maintain control. "You exaggerate everything. You're making mountains out of molehills." I didn't flinch. Instead, I slid a file across to her, a detailed compilation of every action she had taken to undermine me, each one corroborated with evidence. "These mountains are built on facts, Margaret. Not exaggeration. You might want to review them carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. I could see her confident facade cracking, the careful veneer of authority she had built over decades beginning to peel away. Every snide comment, every attempt to isolate me, every subtle manipulation was documented in ink and digital proof. Daniel, sitting beside her, looked increasingly shocked. Mother. I didn't realize all of this. His voice faltered as he read some of the evidence, the reality of his mother's controlling behavior finally hitting him fully. Margaret tried to retort, "This is impossible. You can't just." "You already tried," I interrupted gently, "and failed. Now it's time to acknowledge the consequences." Her eyes darted to the legal documents on the table. "The house. You." "Yes. I legally own this house," I said firmly. "Your attempts to dictate my life here are over. And the evidence you left behind? Irrefutable. Everyone here can see it." The room fell silent. Margaret's breath quickened, her fingers gripped the edge of the table. For the first time, she was unarmed, exposed, unable to leverage fear as she always had. She had underestimated my patience, my intelligence, and my determination. And the most bitter irony: every insult she had ever hurled at me about being powerless or naive had paved the way for her undoing. I paused for dramatic effect, ensuring the weight of reality sank in. Then I continued, "From now on, this household will operate on transparency and mutual respect. Any further attempts to intimidate or manipulate will have consequences, legal, social, and personal. You will no longer have a voice that overshadows mine." Margaret's face had gone pale. Her lips quivered as she tried to formulate a retort, but no words came. For the first time, she was completely powerless in front of the family and me. Over the next hour, I walked her through specific incidents, calmly, showing exactly how she had undermined my life and yet left traces of every move. Each revelation weakened her authority further. By the end of dinner, the transformation was clear. The once dominant matriarch had been reduced to a cornered figure, quiet and subdued, while I had taken full control, not with aggression, but with strategy, evidence, and unwavering composure. The satisfaction wasn't merely in victory, it was in the precision of it. I had outmaneuvered her at every turn without stooping to emotional outbursts or petty retaliation. She had thought she could push me out, humiliate me, and assert dominance, but she failed spectacularly. I had taken every ounce of her arrogance and converted it into leverage for my rightful place in this house. Daniel finally turned to me, gratitude and respect in his eyes. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I see now. Everything you've done, all the patience you've shown. I'm proud of you." I smiled faintly. "Thank you. But the pride doesn't matter. The important thing is that the truth is now visible, undeniable, and justice has been restored." Margaret, defeated and humiliated, left the dinner without a word. The staff, who had witnessed years of her manipulations, nodded discreetly to me, acknowledging the change in the household dynamic. The home that had once been a place of subtle oppression had been reclaimed, not through force, but through intelligence, evidence, and patience. By the following week, I had fully established my authority in the house. Margaret, though physically present, could no longer exercise control. I reorganized household responsibilities, reaffirmed boundaries, and ensured that the atmosphere reflected fairness, respect, and clarity. Every corner of the home, every decision, every interaction now had a framework that I controlled. And the sweetest part? Margaret had underestimated me at every turn, thinking her power absolute, yet she had left the key to her own downfall in her careless arrogance. The house that had once symbolized her dominance was now a testament to my resilience, patience, and strategic mind. In those moments, I understood that true victory isn't about humiliation or revenge for its own sake, it's about reclaiming control, asserting one's rights, and ensuring justice is visible and undeniable. Margaret had taught me many lessons, unintentionally, and the most important one was that patience, intelligence, and careful planning could turn even the direst situation into triumph. As I walked through the hallways of the house that night, I felt a profound sense of peace and empowerment. For the first time in years, the home felt like mine, not just legally, but emotionally and morally. Margaret's shadow, once so suffocating, had been reduced to nothing more than a reminder of the past, and the future was mine to shape. The days following the confrontation with Margaret were surprisingly calm. The storm had passed, but the echoes of her presence lingered, reminders of the years of subtle control and emotional manipulation she had wielded. I spent mornings walking through the house, now officially my home, and afternoons organizing finances, household staff, and future plans. For the first time, I felt an unshakable sense of autonomy, a freedom that was exhilarating and deeply satisfying. Daniel, who had watched the entire transformation unfold, became an unexpected ally. His previous complicity with his mother's tactics had been unintentional, he had been swept along by years of habitual obedience. But witnessing the undeniable truth, the clarity of the evidence, and the precision of my actions had opened his eyes. Slowly, he began to understand the level of manipulation he had ignored. "I wish I had seen this sooner," he confessed one afternoon, looking genuinely remorseful. "But I'm here now, and I want to help." With Daniel on my side, we restructured household roles to ensure fairness. Every decision, big or small, was now transparent. Margaret, though still living under the same roof, had no authority left. Her attempts to assert dominance had been neutralized, her words often falling flat or unheard. It was an unfamiliar silence that hung in the air, but it was a silence that carried the weight of restored balance and justice. But life wasn't just about reclaiming a physical space, it was about reclaiming emotional power. For years, I had internalized her criticism, felt the sting of her judgment, and doubted my own instincts. Now, standing in a home I legally and morally owned, I felt an immense sense of self-assurance. The victories weren't flashy, they were quiet, deliberate, and profoundly empowering. Every corner of the house reflected my authority, my decisions, and my values. Friends and colleagues who had once expressed concern about my relationship with Margaret began noticing a change. I was calmer, more assertive, and unapologetically in control. Invitations to social gatherings, once fraught with anxiety over Margaret's presence, were now events I attended confidently, often receiving compliments on my composure and grace under pressure. The community, once unaware of the household tensions, began to see me as a strong, independent figure, not just a passive daughter-in-law. The most unexpected part of this journey, however, was the personal growth I experienced. I realized that resilience isn't built overnight, it's forged in moments of calculated patience, observation, and careful action. Margaret had underestimated me, believing that fear and intimidation could dictate my choices. Instead, her arrogance became my teacher. She taught me that strategic planning, evidence-based action, and calm decisiveness could accomplish what anger or confrontation alone never could. I also discovered the importance of boundaries. Before this ordeal, I had tolerated overreach, subtle manipulation, and emotional coercion, thinking it was my duty to preserve harmony. Now, I understood that boundaries aren't barriers, they are instruments of respect and clarity. Establishing them doesn't alienate others, it ensures fairness, transparency, and the preservation of one's dignity. Margaret, in her quiet defeat, became a living reminder of these lessons. She no longer influenced household decisions, and her attempts at interference were minimal, often futile. Daniel and I ensured that any future disputes would be handled logically and transparently, leaving no room for manipulation. The house, once a symbol of control and fear, had transformed into a sanctuary of empowerment, fairness, and stability. Looking back, the experience was transformative not just in reclaiming the home, but in reshaping my mindset. I learned to trust my instincts, to document and verify, and to act decisively when necessary. I discovered the power of calm authority and the satisfaction of achieving justice without descending into chaos or personal attacks. My life, once overshadowed by manipulation, had been reclaimed through intellect, strategy, and perseverance. And so, as I sit in my home, now fully my own, I reflect on the journey with gratitude for the lessons it taught me. Margaret's challenge, once a source of anxiety and conflict, became the catalyst for my growth, my empowerment, and my ultimate triumph. The house, now filled with a sense of respect, fairness, and security, stands as a testament to resilience, strategy, and the importance of never underestimating one's own strength. To anyone watching this story unfold, there is a clear takeaway: life may place obstacles and manipulative people in your path, but the ultimate power lies in your ability to observe, plan, and act with precision. Don't underestimate your own intelligence, patience, or capacity to reclaim control. Justice doesn't always require confrontation, it often demands preparation, calm, and clarity. Finally, for Margaret or anyone who may doubt the consequences of underestimating someone, every action has a reaction, every misstep can become evidence, and every assumption of control can backfire spectacularly. And if anyone else is watching this story unfold, remember that resilience and strategy can turn even the most oppressive situations into triumphs. If you've faced similar challenges, or know someone struggling under manipulation, take heart. Empower yourself, document carefully, and reclaim your space, emotionally, legally, and morally. You are stronger than you realize, and the victory is sweetest when it's deliberate, undeniable, and entirely your own. And to all my viewers, if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment below. Your support not only helps this channel grow but also spreads awareness that standing up, planning carefully, and asserting your rights is not just possible, it's essential. Remember, sometimes the house isn't just a home, it's your power, your voice, and your legacy. Make it yours.